for many people, these conditions are not days and weeks, they're not months, they're years and decades. And so by the time you work through all of these issues, your body has had some negative effects that need to be rebuilt. I recently did an interview with Dr. David Jernigan, and he said, you can think of some of these things like termites. And once you get rid of the termites, you still have the damage that's been done to the structure that you need to then go back and work through.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation.
Let's take our next step into the immune system. There was a couple thoughts that we talked before we started recording, but the immune system, such a huge part of our reality and how we can help the immune system with all of these steps. I mean, I like the way you've put together these steps. I think they all kind of have some good building blocks for each other. The building blocks leading into the limbic system, gives you a potential to have a better outcome when you start adding in some of the ideas you're sharing with the limbic system. And then that goes right into the immune system as well.
Yeah. So if we want to talk about, the immune modulation, the inflammation modulation, I would say getting healthy is not about killing bugs. That oftentimes the bug is not what makes the disease, but it's our immune system response, the host response to the bug that makes the disease. And if we have a hypervigilant, hyperactive, overreaching, overarching immune response, or we're responding in an autoimmune type fashion, that there's immune dysregulation, that oftentimes is creating a lot of the symptoms that we experience as our disease process. And so a lot of the inflammation is going to be driven by mast cell activation syndrome and histamine. Microglial activation is another area that I probably will incorporate into this conversation at some point, because I'm learning more about that, and I think it also plays a role. But mast cell activation syndrome, histamine, these are really important contributors to overall inflammation in the body. So what triggers a mast cell to become active, to release these 1,000 different mediators that drive inflammation? Mold exposure in a water damaged building, parasites, Lyme disease, environmental toxins of many kinds, medications, foods, some supplements, even some of the binders and fillers and excipients and things like that. Some people can actually be reactive to. Temperature changes in some cases can trigger mast cell activation, and then physical or emotional stress. Now, interestingly to me, I think that EMFs also play a very significant role here. And I was at a conference a few years ago with Dr. Theodoridis, who's been studying, he's known as the mast cell master, has been studying this realm for 30 plus years. He mentioned in one of his presentations that mast cells are 10 times more activated in the presence of a cell phone. And so,
Wow.
Why are we seeing so much mast cell activation and histamine issues and people having all of these allergic type things? It may be that these EMFs in our environment are another factor that's filling the bucket that we need to explore. And so I think one of the first things to explore in this realm is going to be a trial of a low histamine diet. It's not going to be the solution for everyone, but a lot of people really do have significant reductions in their symptoms once they reduce the histamines in their diet. And sometimes people are surprised that things like kombucha or avocados or bone broth or fermented foods are making the problem worse in people who have this mast cell activation issue. And so you want to look at, are you doing things you think are helping that are actually maybe moving you in the wrong direction? And then once we've eliminated a lot of the sources of histamine in the diet, then it could make sense to incorporate some mast cell stabilizers, some antihistamine type things, quercetin, luteolin, holy basil. There's some great products. Dr. Theodoridis, he has one called Neuroprotect, which is a nice combination of quercetin, luteolin, and rutin. Dr. Ben Lynch has a product called Probiotic Histamine X from Seeking Health. That's the specific probiotics that help to degrade histamine. A lot of times just the regular probiotics people are using are also promoting histamine. And so those can be the wrong things at a specific time in someone's recovery. Dr. Chris Shade has a product called Hista Aid from Quicksilver Scientific that I like a lot as well. And then some people might benefit from pharmaceuticals like Ketotifen or Chromalin. There's also things like DAO that people can incorporate as well. I haven't seen that one being quite as significant, but for some people, if they have some genetic issues that maybe they don't produce DAO, then that could be helpful. And then starting to work with the diet piece and some of the things that we just talked about can lead to very significant shifts in how people feel. The caveat being that you still need to remove the underlying trigger. So if your trigger was mold, yes, you're going to feel better, but you're not going to solve the mast cell issue until you remove the trigger, or commonly triggers. So then we can talk about, getting into more inflammation support, immune modulation. Some people are more and more talking about some of the pro-resolving mediators like SPM active or the gut-specific fish oil from microbiome labs, that those can help to resolve some of this inflammatory cycle or cascade. Immune modulation, I think many people can benefit from things like low-dose naltrexone, low-dose LDA or LDI, low-dose allergen therapy, or low-dose immunotherapy, LDI being from Dr. Ty Vincent. Homeopathy plays a role here as well. I'm really excited right now and just getting into learning more about some of the products from Pure Encapsulations that were put together by Dr. Samuel Yannick, specifically for the purpose of working with TH1, TH2 and supporting this immune modulation realm. And so he's a fantastic resource, particularly if there's practitioners that are listening that want to go and, take his courses. I'm hoping to dig into that a lot more. I was at a presentation with him recently and was really blown away. And so it's important to keep in mind that getting well is not about boosting the immune system, which I think is a common misconception. Oh, I just need to boost my immune system. In many cases, that might actually be the wrong thing, that what we really want to do is modulate the immune system or calm it down and create more integration and tolerance with our microbiome. So lots of things that we can do in this realm. But again, before you get into the kill, you want to do what you can to kind of help support the immune system. And one of the things that I think is happening a lot right now for many reasons is this immune dysregulation. And when we're talking about chronic Lyme disease, maybe someone had their exposure, maybe it was a tick, maybe it was some other insect. They might have had it 30 years ago. They've been fine. But when they move into a moldy apartment or a moldy house, suddenly they get sick and then they get diagnosed with chronic Lyme. Well, what changed? Their immune system became more dysregulated, and some of these things that were managed quite well, the immune system can no longer do that. And so I think this is a really, really critical area, and one that hopefully research, I think there is a lot of research happening, but hopefully this will be an area of ongoing research and new tools and new solutions.
Yeah, touch on a couple things. Basically getting back into some of the complexity when you get into the immune system, and I think you're right on. Boosting the immune system it needs to be a context thing. What do you really need to do for the immune system is really what you're sharing very well. My own personal journey has had a histamine, component. I have used diamine oxidase supplement, Umbrelix, and that has been a part of the puzzle. But ultimately, it hasn't fixed. It's just addressing the reaction I'm having. So there's tools to use, and there's the way that they're used. Sometimes you take something, you think that's the cure, and that's what I think the pharmaceutical world has done to us. You take something, it changes your symptom, so you think that you're fixed, and it's like, well, you've just kind of hid the message in a lot of ways. You're not really addressing the underlying cause. And so, and that's very complex. And again, going back to your own journey, it's been a long journey, my journey, and a lot of people's journey. It's a long journey, and you just got to keep on going down the road. And you've kind of touched on, the cellular component here. And I think that, the next step is that hypercoagulation and the mitochondria, and that has, some, connections obviously to what we're talking about, how we activate our system and how at the very cellular level, what's going on. So that would be step 8, that cellular emphasis.
Yeah, so I'll wind these together. Step 7, I want to touch on as well, just briefly. So
I apologize. I stepped right over 7. I didn't want to do that.
No worries at all. So step 7 is it's really somewhat common sense, but optimizing hydration, nutrition, the microbiome, and gut health. And so one of the things that oftentimes happens in this population is we have low antidiuretic hormone, we drink lots of water, we pee it out, and we're still cellularly dehydrated. So sometimes structuring the water with various tools, there's various devices that you can run the water through or set it next to, and things of that nature. Structuring the water can be great. Adding some electrolytes to the water can be very helpful. I have my electrolytes here. Trace minerals can be a good tool. A little pinch of sea salt can be helpful. And so making sure that we're getting as much hydration support as possible. And then remembering that a lot of the immune system is coming from the gut. So if we are, maybe because we have leaky gut, we're triggering more of an immune response, immune dysregulation, mast cell reactions, and so on. So the first piece is to remove all of the triggering foods. I would say in this population, gluten is bad for almost everyone. I think it's going to be difficult to really optimize health if you're still consuming gluten. Dairy is going to be bad for some. Cow dairy, sheep and goat may be better. A2 dairy may be better, but cow dairy, particularly the A1 dairy, is probably not going to be good for most people. Sugar obviously is not going to be good. It's going to feed the candida, feed the borrelia, all of these things. High histamine foods we talked about, also probably bad for many people, creating more inflammation. And so, the diet has to be individualized, but you can't keep consuming those things that are triggering inflammation and expect to get better. My observation has been that for many people, that low histamine can be a great tool, but there's lots of, paleo, keto, autoimmune paleo. I mean, figuring out what makes the most sense for you. I do think that low histamine for many people has been the one that does seem to move the needle. And hopefully it's not a long term. One of the caveats that can be a little challenging is you can get to the point that your diet is too restrictive, that you're reducing down to so few foods that also maybe isn't healthy. So you have to kind of figure out what makes the most sense. But eliminating a lot of those high histamine foods, I think, can help many people. And then the things that we are consuming should hopefully be as nutrient dense as possible. So I'm a huge fan every morning, my daily power shake that has psyllium and a fiber blend and a high quality protein and phospholipids and healthy fats and different seeds and nuts and things in an organic nut milk that I, make myself. I think that has been tremendous and something that I, really look forward to. And it's been great from a perspective of, rebuilding a lot of muscle and things that I lost over many years of being unwell. So unfortunately now with the amount of psyllium, it's become more of a power pudding than a power shake, but it's it's still quite wonderful. And then with supporting the microbiome, one of my favorite tools over the years has become megaspore biotic, or a lot of these bacillus spores that can be more keystone strains that are facilitating then more diversity within the microbiome. And it's quite nice because most people with mast cell activation or even SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, tolerate megaspore quite well. And so that's been a great tool. BPC 157, which is a peptide that people can also get in an oral form. That can be quite nice for a lot of people for dealing with some of the leaky gut, some of those mast cell type reactions. Dr. Zach Bush, he's got a product that used to be called Restore. Now it's called Ion Biome, Ion Gut Health, that can also be really helpful in kind of supporting the gut. So looking at, what can we do from a hydration, nutrition, a microbiome, and gut support to really optimize health. And then getting into step 8 that you mentioned, this is where we look at the mitochondria, the adrenals, cryptopyruria, and coagulation. And the mitochondria is an area that I really have gotten more interested in the past few years, probably based on some of the work that I've learned from Dr. Todd Watts. And we think a lot about the adrenals, and I do think some adrenal support can be helpful, but a lot of times when people are brain fogged and fatigued and whatnot, sometimes it is that the mitochondria need support. What is it that we can do to increase that energy currency in the body, ATP? So lots of different tools, CoQ10, PQQ, those types of things. But more recently, I would say people are getting interested, and I am as well, in various types of NAD, so NADH, NMN, NR, things that you can incorporate to support the mitochondria, with the caution being that if we look at Dr. Bob Naviau's cell danger response model, where extracellular ATP is the signal that the body is in this cell danger response, that there's a threat present, that we have to be a little careful about not getting too aggressive with the mitochondrial support. So slow and low, and not pushing the body beyond what it's ready for. And then the adrenals, lots of good adaptogenic things that people can do, rhodiola, eleuthero, ashwagandha, things of that nature. There's some great products. Holy basil actually is one of the tools that can be great for the adrenals, but it can be helpful for the mast cell and histamine piece. It can be helpful from the antimicrobial piece. So I think holy basil checks a lot of boxes in these steps that we're talking through. Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt many years ago started talking about cryptopyrroluria, or KPU, which is essentially a condition where people pee out their zinc and B vitamins that support the immune system. He says that your white blood cells then are like an army with no bullets. So supporting these deficiencies, supporting zinc, B6, and some of the cofactors can be really important for providing your immune system the nutrition that it needs to show up and do its job. Again, it's an area that you don't want to go too quickly or too aggressively. If you start reintroducing a lot of zinc in the system, you can release metals, you can, trigger some mast cell activation from the release of metals. So with many of these things, it is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We don't need to do things too aggressively. And then lastly, in step 8, hypercoagulation. So is it a microbe? Is it a toxin that is leading to thick or hyperviscous blood? Metals can do this. Babesia can do this. A lot of different things that can lead to thicker blood, that both mean that nutrient delivery, oxygen delivery is impaired, but so is toxin removal impaired. And so we're looking here at things like lumbrokinase, or there's a specific one called Baluch that can be very helpful, nattokinase in some cases. Sometimes people might need other pharmaceutical interventions, heparin, Lovenox, things of that nature. But this is an area that I really urge people, if you're dealing with a chronic condition like the ones that we're talking about here, you can get some testing done looking at thrombin, antithrombin complexes, fibrin, fibrinogen, prothrombin fragments, things of that nature. I've done a podcast on this with Dr. Ann Corson. It is an area that for me was very significant, and one that I wish I had explored much earlier. And so if people are interested in learning more about that, you can Google and find that podcast. But urging your practitioner to explore that potential, I think, is something that very commonly is not explored and can really be incredibly helpful.
Very important. And I think there's probably some application here with some of the recent history of our health world as well.
Yeah.
Coming into a little bit more of where people start, step 9. And I think it's appropriately positioned, a little bit down the list here, because then I think, what you're setting up for is the opportunity to really deal with the negative microbial realities that we can face.
Yeah. So, we know that killing bugs is not the priority in a balanced health restoration protocol. My type A plus personality wanted to just jump right there, and I, did that, and that was probably the wrong thing to do. So I put this intentionally towards the end. It doesn't mean that it's years later. It's not that it takes a long time to create the foundation for this, but once we start supporting the body against a lot of these different pathogens too, the order can shift. Everyone's going to have different issues, but I would say that commonly I think of starting with supporting the body against some of the viral and retroviral issues, then moving into parasites, gut, SIBO, then moving into the fungal colonization that we talked about, the yeast, and then the Lyme and co-infections. And then some people might need some biofilm support, if they feel better and then they stop and things kind of get worse. It may be that they have some hidden microbes that are sequestered in biofilm. I don't think everybody seems to need that. And we have to be a little careful because there are good biofilms in the body as well. But that's an area that could be explored in some scenarios. So Looking at the viral piece, many of us have reactivation of viruses. Epstein-Barr virus, which again is playing a big role right now, even in the long hauler scenario, that EBV activation seems to be a contributor. Human herpes virus 6, herpes zoster, or what causes chicken pox or shingles.
Right.
There's a lot of these endogenous retroviruses that we are all conceived with that are part of our DNA. And yet, because of the EMFs and other factors that stress the system, they now they actually have an important role, but they now can be moving towards the direction of having some detrimental properties as well. And so, a lot of times, this is an area where we need longer-term support. I'm a big fan of a lot of the tools from BioPure, which is a company that Dr. Klinghardt consults with. They have a fantastic number of antiviral support tools, Beyond Balance as well, Cellcore that we talked about, and then things like sulforaphane can be great, the broccoli sprout type products, pantethine, selenium in some cases, lysine in some cases, and we can also benefit from some of the homeopathics here, Energetics, Desbio. They have tools that are supporting the body with some of these viruses using homeopathic nosodes and homeopathic combinations. Then getting into the gut, the SIBO, the parasites, the GI dysbiosis, I would say parasites are much more common than we really perceive or recognize, particularly when we think, wow, we've never left the US. They're here. It's just that the testing for them is not great. And this has been a big area for me as well, and have worked through it over several years. And so I think when you're looking at parasites, a lot of times you need to look at it from several angles, using the tools that are available from the functional lab testing arena, the GI maps and things of that nature. Diagnostics is another lab up near you that has some good panels as well, but also using energetic testing, whether that's Dr. Klinghardt's system of autonomic response testing or electrodermal screening systems like the Zyto or the Quest 4. Dr. Simon Yu has a system called Acupuncture Meridian Assessment, where he uses a device called the Mora. He's probably the world expert in using systems of energetic evaluation for identifying and working with supporting the body against parasites. I was a patient of his as well, and have tremendous respect for him. So when we're talking about parasites, we're thinking about, worms, nematodes, helminths, and so on, but also the smaller parasites, the Giardia, the Cryptosporidium, the Toxoplasmosis, those types of things. And so fortunately, lots of tools that we can use in that realm. I do think that some people benefit from combining natural and homeopathic, or herbal and homeopathic, and also sometimes the pharmaceuticals. There are certainly some people that do very well with pharmaceutical antimicrobials as well. And then looking at SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, what do we need to do to balance the biome? At the same time, recognizing that SIBO is not just about bacterial overgrowth, but it's the neurological upstream issues, the migrating motor complex, the vagus nerve, that we need to also consider those as potential more causative pieces. It's not just, again, with SIBO, it's not just about killing a bug, as you know. And then dysbioses like Clostridius and H. pylori and Klebsiella and so on. So I'm a big fan of Biocidin is a great product in this realm. The Megaspore biotic we talked about. Beyond Balance has a product called IMNGI that I like as well. So lots of tools. Then we think about the fungal, the yeast, the molds, the candida, the aspergillus, those types of things as well. Again, many natural tools that I think have been very helpful. SF722 from Thorne is one, Mega Mycobalance from Microbiome Labs, Candibactin, AR and BR from Metagenics. Beyond Balance has some, Byron White has them. And then sometimes, particularly if you, again, look at the book Toxic by Dr. Neil Nathan, sometimes there is a place in these fungal colonizations from water damage building exposures where some of the pharmaceuticals like itraconazole can be helpful for some people. So finally, then we get into Lyme, which is Borrelia, co-infections like Bartonella and Babesia, opportunistic infections that are very common in these conditions like mycoplasmas and chlamydias and so on. And so commonly, starting with tools that are more targeted. Let's start first working with the Bartonellas or the Babesias or the Borrelias, and then layering in those kinds of tools. I think if you're starting with super broad spectrum tools early on, it can be too much for many people, that you want to kind of unlayer things as much as possible. And then at a later time, you can, certainly benefit from some of those broad spectrum tools. Again, thinking about biofilms in some people, what are some of the enzyme combinations and things that can break down some of these hiding places? Recognizing that when you're working with biofilms, you're again releasing some of these microbes and toxins back into the system. So you still want to be supporting the body with the antimicrobials, with the detoxification and things in that realm as well. So lots of great companies here. When I started my Lyme journey, diagnosed again July 2005, it was, we're going to put you on antibiotics for 3.5 years. That was the only tool at the time. I didn't have any of these tools. There was no, Stephen Buhner's first book in this realm came out around that time. There was not a lot of awareness. Now we have, the BioPures and the Vital Plans and the Supreme Nutritions and Beyond Balance and Des Bio and MAPA Herbals, Research Nutritionals, Nutrimetics. I mean, now there's so many tools that I recognize there is a place for antibiotics in this realm in some cases, though I'm drawn to explore the natural herbal homeopathics as much as possible. And then thinking about, as we wrap up step 9, are there other adjunct type things we can introduce? Ozone, for example, can be a great tool. Using immune modulation or even some antimicrobial peptides for some people could be helpful. Using different types of frequency devices or physics, introducing some physics type devices into these programs can be very helpful as well. So, again, there's many different things, but that is step 9.
Yeah, that's step 9. And boy, I've got about 100 follow-up questions. So I'm just going to go with a couple of questions on step 9. Sure. One of the things that you mentioned in nutrition as well, step 8 or step 7, was the megaspore. And yep. I'm kind of trying to get back up to speed on probiotics. And one of the things I'm finding with megaspore, and there's another product out there, is they actually make it to the digestive system alive. And that is what sets them apart. Am I kind of up to speed on that? Where a lot of probiotics might not make it to the small intestine and or the large intestine in a state that really makes them less effective.
Yeah, I think that with probiotics, there's a few things. It's number one, making sure that you're not using the histamine promoting strains, which is fairly common. And then what's really nice about megaspore is not only is it immune modulating, inflammation modulating, but it's supporting broader diversity of the microbiome. So maybe there's only 5 types of bacillus spores in it, but ultimately it's creating diversity of a lot of the other organisms in the microbiome as well. Sure. So it is a tool that I personally have used for several years and really like. Probably learned about that also from Dr. Klinghardt way back when. But yeah, I think it has a lot of potential to really influence the microbiome in a positive direction, to your point.
Yeah. And ultimately, when, we're talking about, sometimes you might need to take a pharmaceutical route, which has its own negative toxic effect on, the digestive system, and then to have something that you can follow up with. And it used to be, hey, if you've been on antibiotics, take a probiotic, and there was no real specification on to what type of probiotic, what type of actual spores were you really needing to have in your body. So again, a lot of great information that you're sharing there. And it kind of takes us into step 10, because there's a whole lot of hidden bacterial issues in our oral reality for a lot of people on the planet. And so how does the dental oral health impact, the body? I'm coming up to speed on that. I had a lot of restorative work done here recently. I had an interview with Doctors Nunnally and Owens, and I think had
one of my favorites.
Yeah, and it's just awesome. And I've had some really great dental work, but I really haven't got into what we're going to talk about now. So share a little bit about dental and oral health.
Yeah, so I think for some people, this is going to come much earlier. For some people, it makes sense to be later in the process. Part of why I put it here is Dr. Klinghardt would say that We want to look at some of these endogenous retroviruses to set the stage for this really, any procedures healing well and getting optimal results. Dr. Simon Yu often likes to address the parasites first, but certainly some people will have more significant issues that need to be addressed earlier. We're thinking here about things like amalgams, root canals, cavitations that can be really significant stressors on the body. I think most people understand that having metals in the mouth is probably not health supporting. Having a dead tooth in the mouth from a root canal is probably not health supporting. Maybe some people that are healthy can get by with that for a while, but if you're already struggling, that's probably not going to be health supporting. And then cavitations are infections in the jawbone, most commonly where there was a previously extracted tooth. I remember reading a book years ago. It was called The Tick Slayer by Perry Fields, who was an Olympian that eventually had her own Lyme journey. There was a whole chapter in there on cavitations. I think I was reading it while I was doing a coffee enema, if I remember correctly. And she talked about her journey with cavitations and how there was black stuff coming out of her, when they opened them up. And I thought, oh, thank God I did not have to deal with that. I then subsequently went to see Simon Yu in St. Louis. He was teaching a conference, and I said, well, can I get you to evaluate me while I'm there? I set up an appointment with him, and his first comment was, you have a dental issue. And I remembered in high school having my lower right wisdom tooth extracted. All 4 of them were extracted. But I remember after that extraction, I got infected. I got dry sockets. They had to do a bunch of antibiotics, repack them, all of those things. So he had no idea. And I said to him, well, which tooth do you think is an issue? And he said, well, the lower right is the one that stands out the most, but I also think something's going on with the upper right. So I went to a surgeon that he worked very closely with. The surgeon said, I really don't see any reason that leads me to think that you have cavitations, but I've worked with Dr. Simon Yu long enough to know that he's usually right. So you go to lunch and then let me know whether you want to have your mouth opened up and cleaned out, and we'll proceed from there. And so fortunately, I did that, and they did find all kinds of stuff that needed to be cleaned out. It was later diagnosed as osteonecrotic tissue. And so when we have those cavitations and infections in the mouth, they're producing toxic mercaptans and thioethers and other things that are also another source of toxicity in the body. Some cases, they can be carcinogens that eventually lead to cancer as well. So I think the exploration in this realm is important. At the same time, timing is critical. I don't think somebody that's working with their Lyme or chronic illness practitioner should independently go to a dentist or surgeon and start working down that path without very close coordination, making sure that your body is supported at the same time. Is it the right time for you based on other things that you're doing? You really want to have that collaboration there. In the meantime, there's lots of good things that we can do to support the oral biome. We know that the oral biome, the oral microbes do impact us systemically.
Right.
We know that when they look at the brains of people that have passed from Alzheimer's, that they find dental spirochetes, dental bacteria, Treponema denticola, P. gingivalis, things of that nature. So, if these things in our mouth are getting to our brain and potentially contributing to things like dementia and Alzheimer's, that really makes this critical. So there's various essential oil combinations that people can brush with, biobotanical research that makes the biocidin that I mentioned earlier. They have a couple of products called dental cidin that are great. Research Nutritionals, one of my favorite companies, also just came out with a product called Aura Max, which is a dissolvable tablet that contains the right probiotics to optimize the oral microbiome. And so I've been using that, and I'm really excited that they have that as well. And so, again, my thought at putting this towards the end is that it's not something to be taken lightly. When we do work in this realm, we want to make sure that we have that close working relationship with our dentist and our primary provider. But it is an area that unfortunately some people do need to explore and do some work in to really fully recover their health.
Yeah, and there's some really good biological dentists out there for sure,
Yeah.
and opportunities there. And I think it's so important to connect that the whole list that we're talking about, because you can open up a can of worms in your mouth and be in trouble because you haven't really addressed some of the steps we've already covered. So
Yes.
we're kind of getting down to some time here and wrapping
Yeah.
up, and it's perfect time to get us into step number 11.
All right.
The supporting and rebuilding and regeneration step.
Yeah, so I think for many people, these conditions are not days and weeks, they're not months, they're years and decades. And so by the time you work through all of these issues, your body has had some negative effects that need to be rebuilt. I recently did an interview with Dr. David Jernigan, and he said, you can think of some of these things like termites, and once you get rid of the termites, you still have the damage that's been done to the structure that you need to then go back and work through. So
right.
I think this is where some people could benefit from hormone replacement therapies, progesterone, testosterone, those types of things. But again, sometimes the hormonal interventions will backfire if someone's still in that cell danger response. So could some people benefit from hormonal replacement earlier? Sure. But while you're still dealing with the tiger, you ideally don't want to be too aggressive with some of these things until you've worked through what are the primary contributors that the person's dealing with, or what are those stressors that we need to mitigate first. I think that phospholipids, given that they are what create the cell membranes, and a lot of the membranes within the cell can be great. So oral phospholipids, I have mentioned that I put them into my power shake in the morning, but also the IV phospholipids. So that's Dr. Patricia Kane's work, where you're using phosphatidylcholine, phenylbutyrate, glutathione, sometimes some methylation support. That can be really, really fantastic for supporting the cell membranes. Peptides are emerging in this realm as well for restoration. They're also great in that immune modulation that we talked about, but various peptides that can support repair and restoration and regeneration. BPC 157 is a fairly commonly known one, but there's lots of others. The challenge with the peptides is they're becoming more restricted by the FDA, so they're not quite as easy to get, but there are practitioners that work in the peptide realm. Photobiomodulation is another great thing. So using red light therapy to support the mitochondria, to rebuild collagen. Borrelia or Lyme feeds on collagen. So our collagen is probably impacted over time as well. So what can we do to support that? Sometimes taking collagen supplementally can work, but the reality is that can also be a histamine promoter. And so sometimes you need to find other ways to do that. Red light therapy can be great, giving our body more photons, more vital force. Stem cells and exosomes and things in that realm, I'm constantly watching, though I would say that I haven't seen stem cells generally being incredibly helpful in the chronic Lyme arena, particularly when it's done too early. I think you have to do as much as possible to set the stage. And if you do all of those other things, maybe some of these things will be helpful. I'm certainly excited to observe some of the things that are happening in the exosome realm and some of the practitioners working there. So hopefully that becomes something that I'm more excited about over time.
Sure.
EWOT, or exercise with oxygen therapy, is something that I've done almost every day for about the last year. I think it's tremendously helpful for restoration, where you're switching between super low oxygen, like 15%, and then higher oxygen, like 85 to 90%, and exercising at the same time. That can be great for cognition, for oxygenation, for detoxification, and can really be a nice restorative, regenerative tool. So lots of things in this realm to think about. But again, once we've gotten rid of the termites, thinking about what can we do to fortify or rebuild the structure.
Yeah, that's totally awesome. Wow. I just knew that you were going to share with us a great quality amount of information. And I'm very, very thankful for that. Anything that you wanted to just kind of final touch on and let us know where one could follow up with you and continue to be blessed by what you're doing and what you found in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to reach out, my website is betterhealthguy.com. All of the podcasts are there. You can also find the podcast Better Health Guy blogcast on iTunes and all of the other popular platforms for podcasting. I am involved with an organization called the Limelight Foundation, which I'm super excited to have been on the board for about the last 8-9 years now. It's an organization where we provide treatment grants to children and young adults 25 and under for the treatment of Lyme disease. We are now at, I believe, over $6 million in grants that we've given out to people. And so if anyone listening is interested in supporting that work or in a position where you could potentially benefit from a grant, you can learn more about that at limelightfoundation.org. And then I guess the last thing I would say is, don't lose hope. There are so many things that have changed and have emerged in this realm over the last few years that I think now there is more hope for recovering from these chronic conditions, now more so than ever. And in the last few years, it's been super exciting to finally see some research and some new tools and things that are coming out. For a long time, it seemed like the tools were fairly static, but I think that's changing a lot. New tools, new solutions are really emerging. And I think it's just important to keep the hope. There is hope and people do get better.
That's really cool. Are you going to have any more annual physician conferences?
Yeah, we just actually had one earlier this month, which was phenomenal. So the Forum for Integrative Medicine, which is forumforintegrativemedicine.org, we are doing annual events. They were originally in person. The last couple of years, they've been virtual, but we just had a fantastic one with some great speakers. That was one where I heard Dr. Samuel Yannick talk that I mentioned earlier in our conversation. And we are just starting to work on our plans for an event for early next year as well.
Awesome. Hey, so I'll just kind of reiterate what you just ended up with, with so much fear and frustration that people face for all kinds of reasons, and a little bit big heaping of it over the last couple of years to boot. I'm glad you're providing hope and helping those have some optimism to look forward to. So thankful that you joined us today. I know that this will be a blessing to everybody who was able to listen. And,
thank you so much, Dr. Ernst. It was super fun talking with you. I can tell that your heart and your intention is to really help people as well. And so thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm very thankful. Everybody have a great day.